Yo, what's up, chefs? This video is going to be a 1400 hour player's perspective on solo PvP, where I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible and really hone in on some of the most important concepts that you can start implementing into your gameplay immediately. The video is going to be broken up into 3 sections, starting with what I believe to be is the most important concept for improving your ability to PvP, slash what I think 99% of all PvP interactions can be tied back to, and finally I'll be ending it with some full fight breakdowns. Chapters can be found below. Without further ado, let's hop into it. Alright, so first up, we're going to talk about the concept that 99% of Dark and Darker PvP can be boiled down to, and that is gaining slash losing an advantage. Before I give my explanation of what that means and some examples though, I want you to try something. If you're really serious about improving at PvP in Dark and Darker, then you should try getting into the mindset of wanting to win every fight you take. Not winning as many fights as possible, not taking as many fights as possible, but specifically, every fight you decide to take will be a winning fight. The only way to accomplish this is by trying your best to take high percentage fights. So for the rest of this video and the next time you load up the game, try and get into that mindset by just thinking to yourself, I want every fight I decide to take to be a win. Now that you've hopefully gotten yourself into that mindset, let's talk about gaining slash losing an advantage. The phrase is somewhat self-evident, but to expand upon it a little bit, think about the idea of pushing forward slash applying pressure when you have an advantage, and falling back slash looking for an opportunity to even up the odds when you're at a disadvantage. To ensure you have a proper understanding, let me give you 2 easy examples. The first one is something I won't cover in this video, but having better gear is one of the most outwardly obvious ways of having an advantage, particularly because whoever has better gear actually has an advantage before the players even see each other outside of the pre-game lobby, which can be very impactful. This is why a good player that specifically wants to win every fight they take will run away immediately when they see someone more geared than them, because that innate advantage of gear diff is substantial. And why would you take a fight that you already have a significant disadvantage in before the fight has even started? The second example, which is probably even a bit easier to process, is when 2 players get ready to fight and one of them uses a protection pot and the other player doesn't have time to use one. This is an example of a time where the person that was able to get the protection pot off should look to push their advantage and apply pressure, where the person who didn't use the protection pot should 100% look to avoid fighting until the protection pot wears off, or they are able to find an opportunity to use one themselves to bring the fight back to even. Now that you have a solid understanding of gaining slash losing an advantage, you'll probably start to see how that relates to every PvP encounter you have. Now let's move into defining and demonstrating with gameplay footage some of the key concepts that are related to gaining an advantage that I think are most important slash readily available to be implemented into your fights. First up is positioning. An easy way to apply this to your own games is to think about the playstyle that your class excels at and then ask the same question about your opponent. Or better yet, ask that question about every other class in advance, so you don't have to think about it too much the moment you see someone. An easy example of this is a ranger obviously wants to play in an area with a good amount of space to kite back and open sightlines. A barbarian, on the other hand, wants to play in a more constricted space with ample cover to be able to avoid taking ranged damage as he approaches. Fights can be single-handedly won or lost based on positioning. Let me show you what that looks like. First off, I'll show you a fight I won based off positioning. Oh, here he is. This is a Bard vs Barbarian matchup, where both of us were sub 100 gear score, so we were on pretty even footing. Take notice of how the room we're in, essentially being an infinitely looping hallway with an open sightline, makes the fight very easy for me and miserable for him. Also, how I always prioritize my position slash spacing by stowing my weapons whenever necessary to create space and maintain a safe distance between us. The next example is another Bard versus Barbarian matchup where positioning single-handedly lost me the fight. The important thing to note here is that my decision to try and pick up the collectibles upon hearing him approach instead of immediately running upstairs to the door to open it and give myself space to kite forced me into a head-to-head melee matchup. This barbarian was definitely less geared than me, and I got the jump on him by getting a couple hits in while he had his weapon put away, but none of that mattered because this was his domain and nothing beats a Barb in a bar fight. No, man, this guy's gonna be low. Damn it. I should have paid attention. Next up is cooldown management, which is insanely important in Dark and Darker, and a lot of times comes down to who can hold their cooldowns the best. And as someone who has played at least 600 plus hours of Warlock, let me give you one of the easiest examples before showing another example with some footage. Visualize a Slayer fighter versus a Warlock, which I believe to be a relatively fair matchup, and now think about the cooldowns Sprint versus Phantomize. One of the key ways to win this fight from either side is to hold your cooldown longer than the other person, and it's a bit easier to understand from the fighter POV, so I'll tell it from that side. But essentially, if you sprint at the Warlock, then by the time you get into melee range, they will pop their Phantomize, and your sprint will run out before their Phantomize does. And since Phantomize also gives move speed, a gap will be created between the players, and now with no cooldowns in play, the positional advantage for the Warlock should allow them to easily win the fight. On the flip side, if you can hold a corner as the fighter and wait for the Warlock to walk into you and force them to Phantomize before you use sprint, then the fight is literally over. All you have to do as the fighter now is stow your weapons and follow them, and once the Phantomize ends, pop your sprint and kill them in like 3 hits. Another type of cooldown management that I'll show via some gameplay is managing the enemy's cooldowns. As a bard with no cooldowns of your own, an easy example of this is trying to bait a barbarian into using Rage or Savage Roar, and then playing around / respecting that cooldown usage by stowing your weapons and running away. Let's see what that looks like. There's Rage again, so I'm going to stow my weapon. Hit my debuff really quick. See, he's playing this corner. I'm going to pop a health pot. Stow my weapon because he used Rage. Watch, he's gonna put his weapon away in a second. I'm gonna pull my weapon out and I'm gonna commit. Maybe he's not. Okay, he's going back to the left. Alright. There's a blood exchange. Hit him with the slow. Dead. That fight probably looked pretty hard for the barbarian, but if he was holding a corner and waiting to use Rage whenever I got close, he would have had a much better chance, and realistically it would have ended up in a stalemate where neither of us pushed into one another, assuming we didn't want to give up the advantage. The final concept I want to go over before we get into some full fight breakdowns is matchups. If you've ever played any type of class or character-based PvP game before Dark and Darker, then you probably have an idea of what this is, but for anyone that hasn't, essentially it's just how two different classes or characters collide. usually prefaced with an adjective such as a good or bad matchup. Matchups are arguably one of the most important parts of solo PvP in Dark and Darker, because a lot of the veteran players tend to agree that solos PvP in large can be described as a rock, paper, scissors style. For example, Ranger beats Warlock, Warlock beats PDR Fighter, and PDR Fighter beats Ranger. However, not all matchups are as black and white as the ones I just described, and typically they just fall somewhere on a spectrum between nearly unwinnable and nearly unlosable, assuming gear and player skill is even. This directly ties back to the original concept of gaining an advantage, in the sense that good matchups for you are fights you should opt into taking, and bad matchups for you are fights you should avoid if at all possible. Unfortunately, it would be unreasonable for me to go into every matchup in this video, but just remember that Barbarian basically beats everything, so make sure we nerf Rogue. But in all seriousness, if you guys want a video that covers Bard's solo matchups specifically and how to deal with them, then let me know in the comments. For the final section of the video, I'm just going to play out a few full fights to see how everything we've talked about comes together when it actually matters. I'm going to try and let the fights play out without interruption as much as possible, so keep an eye out for any on-screen text if I feel like there's something really important that I should point out. Alright. Someone probably spawned over here? Yeah, someone spawned, am I right? I lost this guy for a second. This is a bit of an advanced maneuver that wasn't covered in the video so far, so I thought I would outline it really quick. When I did a jump 180 right here, it was to get information. 1, how close was he? And 2, were his weapons out or put away? Since I noticed his weapons were put away, I quickly decided that I was going to turn on him in the doorway, which is why I love the Rondel dagger so much, because most weapons, including his club, do not function efficiently in doorways due to hitting the walls and staggering your attack pattern, but the Rondel doesn't have this issue. However, faking a retreat and turning on someone is a good strategy if used effectively, typically regardless of the weapons in question, but can be more or less effective depending on them. Here it is in action. Let's go. I'm swapping wrong. Let's go. After landing the third servbow shot and hitting him with the juke that caused us to switch sides and ultimately put me on the side of the static extract, I decided to take my opportunity and commit to the fight, because now that I had the extract to my back, if anything went wrong, I had the option to retreat and take the static to escape, which is another important part of positioning. I'm getting counterbossed from up top. I have to watch out for the third party from Troll Room. Also might counterbossed by a second player from up top. Gotta stay focused. Don't loot right away. Make sure I heal up and rebuff. I hear the skeleton mage fighting up top above me, so there is another player. Holy shit, that's a good cloak. Dude, the counterbossing is crazy. Holy shit, bro. We both suck. We both suck. Some things worth pointing out. At the end, the Warlock had a really solid aim, being able to land both curses as I went to push, but then the fight kind of fell apart in a number of ways. From his side, he got punished really hard for using Phantomize without casting Flamewalker first, so I was able to just stay on top of him and be melee range as his Phantomize ended. After that, well, you saw what happened, and I don't really want to talk about it, but I will just say that both of us were schmoving during that fight with crouch spams, strafing left and right, but either way it goes, we both missed/dodged a bunch of hits, and I barely came out on top. The number one thing to learn from that fight though is the way I retreated the entire time that I was at a disadvantage, which allowed me to heal up and find an opportunity to gain the advantage for myself via hitting some pre-fire shots with the serve bow. Other than that, he had some rather poor Phantomize usage, which I was able to take advantage of, and everything else is just history. That's going to wrap up the video though. I hope you guys were able to learn something new and take it with you the next time you load up the game or find yourself in a PvP situation. And last but not least, take it easy, chefs.